everyone, welcome back to Paranormal Asia. Tonight's story is one that feels close because anyone who has stayed at a hotel in Japan might have already brushed against it. Locals whisper it's real, visitors treat it like rumor, but the rule is always the same: never ride alone. Before we descend, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Think about it. Time decides everything. Daytime makes hotels ordinary. Midnight turns them into something else. Would you dare press the button when the lobby is empty? Three figures anchor this story. Aya, 24, a student from Nagoya who worked part-time at a guest house, careful and soft-spoken. Kenji, a salaryman from Osaka, traveling for meetings, restless and often pacing his room. And Mrs. Watanabe, the night receptionist who smiled politely but prayed under her breath. Aya loved the routine of folding towels and making tea sets for guests. She was meticulous even when nobody was watching. But she hated elevators. She claimed they blinked, that was her word, as if the air inside shifted briefly before settling. She avoided them unless her shift demanded it nightly. Kenji didn't believe in anything. He traveled too often to care about hotels. To him, lobbies were all the same: glass doors, canned music, potted plants. Yet he always left his shoes neatly lined, as though order kept him safe. He noticed Aya's hesitation but never asked. Silence suited them. Mrs. Watanabe had seen too much. She worked nights because she preferred the quiet, but she also whispered sutras when she thought guests weren't listening. Her hands trembled when the lift door opened and nobody stepped out. She called it a shadow guest, though she never wrote it down. The hotel itself wasn't famous, a mid-rise block near a station with glowing signage that buzzed faintly in rain. Most guests remembered the breakfast buffet more than the building, but inside, the elevators had rules. Old staff said, never use them alone at midnight, not for luggage, not even once. You see, Japan has many beliefs tied to spirits wandering liminal spaces, thresholds, tunnels, corridors, and yes, elevators. They're moving rooms between worlds. At midnight, when day and night overlap, those moving rooms don't always stop where you expect. Aya, Kenji, and Mrs. Watanabe would learn this truth together soon. In Japanese folklore, spirits favor the unnoticed places: stairs, alleyways, abandoned floors. Elevators are worse because they blur time. Doors close, numbers change, silence thickens. Some say if you press certain buttons at midnight, the elevator won't take you where you wanted. It'll take you where someone else waits. Aya heard these stories from her grandmother, who warned her as a child, never look at the mirrors inside. She'd said, you might not like what looks back. At the hotel, Aya checked her reflection every night anyway. Her eyes always seemed duller in the elevator light, less alive. Kenji had his own rhythm: meetings by day, whiskey by evening, restless pacing at night. He often returned past midnight, his briefcase swinging, tie loose. He didn't think twice about pressing the button alone. Elevators were just metal boxes. To him, rules like avoid midnight rides belonged to old superstitions. Mrs. Watanabe, though, kept a careful log. She never rode at midnight herself. Instead, she watched patterns from the reception desk. Sometimes she'd see the elevator pause between floors for longer than it should, like someone invisible had called it. Her pen scratched quick notes, but her lips whispered faster. The hotel staff called it the 13th stop, though the building had only 12 floors. Guests sometimes mentioned arriving at a level that didn't exist. Dim corridor, long shadows, carpets wet as though freshly cleaned. When the doors closed and reopened, the floor numbers jumped, skipping seconds like broken film. Aya once asked another worker if they believed it. He shrugged but wouldn't meet her eyes. Don't ride alone at midnight, he muttered. That's when she comes. He didn't explain who she was. Aya never pressed further, but every shift past midnight made her pulse quicken anyway, against her will. And so the rule survived, passed in whispers and half-jokes, lived out in small choices: stairs instead of buttons, waiting for another passenger, carrying luggage by hand. Tonight's story unfolds because the rule was broken. Aya, Kenji, and Mrs. Watanabe would each face what the hotel elevators carried after midnight. Morning at the hotel felt harmless, the kind of brightness that makes night superstitions look silly. The lobby smelled of brewed tea and lemon cleaner, soft jazz barely there. Aya started with the checklist, rolling a cart of yukata, spare slippers, and tiny packets of salt. One packet always stayed in her pocket. Her grandmother said salt closes doors, the living can't see. She laughed at herself for keeping it, but rituals are anchors. Kenji, 3 floors up, timed his day in emails and elevators, saving small courtesies like lined shoes and folded tie for luck he didn't admit. He told himself travel teaches indifference, yet he noticed which lifts stalled and which mirrors smudged. Mrs. Watanabe arrived with a thermos and a notebook, nodded to security, and counted room keys without looking down. She preferred nights, fewer voices, clearer patterns. By noon, rain threaded the air, turning reflections silver on the pavement outside. Guests flowed in waves, families, sales teams, a couple arguing about umbrellas in whispers. Elevators dinged and closed and opened, a pulse the building followed. Aya restocked teas, Kenji rehearsed his slides, Miss Watanabe logged routine incidents just in case. Nothing dramatic happened. That is how most hauntings begin, with normal daylight doing its best impression of safety, and everyone believing rules are folklore until the hour that tests them, the one the old staff warn about and the new staff forget. The building inhaled quietly, exhaled slower, and nobody heard it yet, not even reception. Aya's routine outside the hotel stayed small by design. She rented a narrow room 2 stations away, window overlooking a humming vending machine that never slept. She studied late, ate rice balls, and kept coins in a jar wrapped with a paper charm. The salt packet moved from coat to apron to bedside like a habit she refused to judge. Her phone carried reminders nobody else saw. Call mother, water plant, don't ride alone after 12. She never wrote the last one down. Superstition works better when it pretends to be memory. Kenji's normal looked different. Presentations, convenience store dinners, quiet gym visits where he never met anyone's eyes. He rewarded himself with orderly rituals, neatly arranged toiletries, polished shoes, 2 glasses of water before sleep. Work called him efficient. He called himself temporary, a suitcase person who lived between card keys. Mrs. Watanabe's life centered on the desk. She rode an early evening train, read mysteries, and changed into soft-soled shoes that left no sound on marble. Her notebook began long ago, after a guest complimented her kindness, and then asked why the elevator had paused on a dark floor. She started logging coincidences because patterns only appear if somebody bothers to keep score. These are small lives, ordinary and true. Put together, they made a net strong enough to catch what drifted through the hotel at night, at least long enough for us to see it clearly once. Ordinary days tighten the spring that midnight will always release. Weather decided Act 1. A slow rain settled over the district, narrowing sound and stretching reflections into ribbons across the pavement. Droplets beaded on the lobby glass and ran downward like handwriting, making the street look half erased. Aya lined umbrellas in a bucket and set towels by the door, the kind of hospitality nobody remembers until it goes missing. Kenji delayed his final meeting to avoid small talk, retreated to his room, and rehearsed slides while counting breaths. He felt good, organized, almost restful. Mrs. Watanabe watched the elevator camera feed out of habit. The wide-angle lens gave everyone the same posture, as if strangers became relatives for a few seconds while traveling. She sipped tea and marked timestamps when doors hiccuped. A quick open-close barely anyone notices. Afternoon thinned, the lobby quieted, and rain deepened into a steady curtain. 2 school teams checked in. One lift grew sluggish from weight in wet shoes. The other elevator stayed crisp, arriving before a finger left the button, like it already knew the request. A maintenance note appeared. Inspect cab 2 after 2300 for a minor delay between floors 10 and 11. Nobody felt nervous. Why would they? There are hours when buildings act like people. Moods, pauses, preferences, even a sense of humor. Rain makes them reflective. Night teaches them secrecy. By evening, secrecy was learning the lobby again, step by patient step. As a harmless day slid toward its hinge, the hinge would be midnight, exactly. Dinner hours blurred into late evening in the way hotels perfect. The restaurant closed early for a family emergency. The bar looped 3 songs that sounded like the same song, and housekeeping finished the last turnovers. Aya stalked the service cart and walked floor 9, where the lighting hummed a half-tone higher than elsewhere. She disliked that floor without reason, and reminded herself preference is not proof. Kenji approved expenses, sent a final email, and promised himself 1 cigarette beneath the awning if the rain lightened. He stood at the window, watching taxis string red beads through the street. Mrs. Watanabe faced the elevators from the desk, posture easy, mind counting, eyes noticing who waited and who refused to. A courier delivered a slim parcel with a faded sticker. The sender's address had been rubbed away. It went to storage, signed and forgotten. The night shift settled. The building changed register around them, as if the rooms breathed out together. On camera, a child in a yellow coat pressed buttons to watch them glow. The car stopped on a floor, reopened, and she laughed. Her mother tugged her away. Nothing about the footage looked wrong, yet Mrs. Watanabe wrote down the timestamp anyway. Aya returned to the lobby with fresh towels and thought the mirrors made her face unfamiliar again, a dullness that only elevator light could produce. It passed. She dismissed it. Act 1 kept its shape, ordinary edges, ordinary seams, ordinary hands keeping them aligned, for now. The last span of Act 1 began with small timing errors. A guest on floor 11 requested a toothbrush, and Aya misread the room number, sending her one floor too low. It meant an extra ride, a trivial delay that would slide her evening toward a chime she usually avoided. She checked her cracked watch and felt a harmless tug in her wrist, like a thread reminding her of something she'd chosen not to remember. Kenji decided the rain had thinned enough for a cigarette under the awning. He preferred even numbers and aimed to be back by 23:58 because midnight felt untidy, like an unmade bed. He told himself the smoke would help him sleep. Mrs. Watanabe balanced the cash drawer, signed the log, and stepped away from the desk long enough to refill hot water. The elevator chimed while she stood in the pantry. On the monitor, doors opened to an empty cab, then shut. Aya wheeled past at that moment and didn't see. The camera time advanced a minute. Kenji flicked ash into a puddle that reflected the elevator's indicator through the glass doors, a red arrow beating like a pulse. Somewhere on floor 10, a housekeeping closet door drifted and tapped its frame twice. The sound didn't travel. Their normal lives still held, threads tight, routines intact. But the building had already chosen its route. Numbers fixed, stops arranged, doors rehearsed. It only needed midnight to lock the pattern and carry them where it wanted. Midnight arrived with the kind of silence that feels chosen. Rain had thinned to mist, and the lobby lights burned a shade too bright against it. Aya wheeled her service cart back toward the elevators, eyes flicking to her cracked watch. 12:03. She pressed the call button and tried not to think of her grandmother's voice, warning about reflections. The doors opened with a groan she didn't remember hearing earlier. Inside, the cab smelled faintly metallic, like blood on copper pipes. She stepped in, clutching her pocket where the salt packet rested. The mirrored walls showed her from 3 angles, each slightly out of sync, as though one reflection blinked slower than the others. She told herself it was fatigue. The car moved smoothly to the 9th floor, but lingered. Numbers glowed, 10, then 11, then nothing. The display froze, humming faintly. Aya's throat tightened. For 1 second, the mirrored Aya looked away from her, eyes angled toward the corner where the ceiling met the door. A tiny crack sounded above, as if something had shifted in the crawl space. The doors opened finally, floor 11, as requested, but the corridor was too dim, lamps barely breathing light. Her watch ticked loudly, far louder than it should. Aya wheeled her cart out, but her reflections lagged, staying inside until the doors closed. When she turned back, the car was already gone, climbing without a button pressed. She whispered a prayer without sound. Routine had broken. The rule she lived by was already in play. Kenji returned from his cigarette at 12:05, damp shoulders, briefcase in hand. He preferred elevators to stairs. Business hotels are built for efficiency, not charm. He pressed the button, expecting the usual fast response. Instead, the light flickered once before staying red. The doors slid open too slowly. Inside, the cab was empty, yet warm, as if someone had just stepped out. He entered without hesitation, pressing 7. The elevator moved upward, smooth at first. At floor 3, the car paused, doors parting onto a corridor lined in shadow. Kenji frowned. The hotel only had a service landing there, not a guest floor. The carpet outside looked damp, patterned with footprints leading nowhere. He stayed inside, assuming error, but as the doors tried to close, resistance shivered through the frame, like unseen hands keeping them ajar. He pressed door close. The panels resisted, then shut with a reluctant sigh. The cab continued, numbers glowing wrong. 5, 8, then back to 6. Kenji shook his head, telling himself fatigue was tricking him. Still, he loosened his tie, pulse rising. His reflection on the side panel looked pale, slightly thinner, as though drained by the ride. He adjusted his glasses. His reflection didn't. By the time the car stopped at 7, sweat clung to his collar. The hall appeared normal, bright with patterned carpet. But Kenji stepped out quickly, deciding stairs might serve him better tomorrow. Behind him, the cab's light dimmed as the doors closed, as though pleased to have carried him halfway into the pattern. At the reception desk, Mrs. Watanabe noted the disturbances almost immediately. The log showed repeated elevator pauses between floors 9 and 11, entries that made no sense for a Tuesday night. She checked the monitor feed. On one screen, Aya appeared wheeling her cart into the corridor, but the timestamp blinked irregularly, digits skipping like tape corruption. Another feed showed Kenji entering, but his reflection lagged a half second, mouth opening later, tie adjusting slower. Mrs. Watanabe's hands trembled. She reached under the desk for a small cloth pouch containing rice and salt, a protection charm she'd carried since her husband's passing. She whispered sutras beneath her breath, watching the screen. At 12:12, both cars began moving without being called. One descended, the other ascended, stopping on phantom floors. Mrs. Watanabe felt the desk shake slightly, a vibration in the marble that didn't match the building's usual hum. Her thermos rattled. The clock on the wall ticked slower, each second stretched. She wanted to call maintenance, but no technician could fix what patterns refused. On the screen, the doors opened onto a floor not listed. The hall looked longer, darker, with wallpaper curling like old skin. A shadow crossed slowly, though no guest had been there. Mrs. Watanabe scribbled the time in her notebook, hand unsteady. For years she'd avoided writing at midnight. Tonight she understood why the rule was less suggestion and more contract. The elevators were moving rooms, and now they had chosen passengers. Aya felt it clearest. Floor 11 didn't match her memory. The lamps were dimmer, walls damp as though the rain had seeped upward. She wheeled the cart forward, listening for voices. Silence pressed, heavy enough to bend her shoulders. At the far end, a service door rattled lightly, though no draft existed. She froze. Behind her, the elevator chimed again, doors opening without a call. She turned. The cab was lit, but the panel displayed no numbers. Her reflections waited inside, still and pale. One tilted her head a fraction too far. Aya pressed her hand into her pocket, fingers gripping the salt. She wanted to leave the cart, return to safety, but the floor stretched strangely, longer than she remembered. Each step echoed louder, as if she was walking inside a tunnel. She reached the guest room she'd been assigned, slid the toothbrush under the door, and whispered an apology she couldn't explain. Returning, the corridor lights buzzed out briefly, plunging her into a grayness where her breath felt visible. When the lamps blinked back, the elevator stood open again. She stepped closer, heart drumming. Inside, the mirror wall now showed three Aya-like figures. One had her eyes shut, another's mouth twitched as if whispering. The third stared directly, lips pale and drawn. She stumbled back. The doors closed on their own, and the sound was not mechanical but organic, like lungs exhaling. Aya whispered her grandmother's words under her breath. Salt, she thought. Salt seals what you don't want following. But was it enough? Kenji poured himself whiskey in his room, hands shaking harder than he liked to admit. He'd ridden hundreds of elevators before, but something about tonight felt engineered. He checked his watch. Midnight had passed only minutes ago, yet the second hand twitched backward before correcting. He frowned, set the glass down. From his window he could see the reflection of the hotel's second elevator in the lobby mirrors, though he shouldn't from that angle. Its doors kept opening and shutting, like a mouth rehearsing speech. He shut the curtains quickly. His phone buzzed once, no notification showing. He placed it on silent. Then the room light flickered. A faint hum rose from the wall behind the bed, the elevator shaft. He pressed his ear against it. A sound echoed faintly, not mechanical. It resembled breathing, shallow and patient. His blood ran cold. He backed away, deciding sleep was safer. He locked the door, though locks felt symbolic now. Downstairs, Mrs. Watanabe rubbed her charm raw, whispering faster, every prayer syllable layered with fear. Upstairs, Aya held Salt tight, her pulse racing. All three of them now threaded into the same unfolding pattern. The elevators were not malfunctioning. They were hunting, choosing, carrying passengers where floors don't belong. Midnight had only begun, and already reality inside the hotel was folding. What waits when doors open at the wrong stop? That was the question each would face, separately, but bound together by one unseen passenger who never checked in, never left, and never stopped riding. The witching half-hour arrived. By 12:30, the hotel seemed to breathe differently, each corridor drawn long, as though stretched by unseen hands. Aya forced herself to the stairwell, but the door handle burned cold and refused to turn, like frost welded it shut. She spun back toward the elevators and froze. Both cabs stood waiting. One displayed floor 13, a number the hotel didn't have. The other glowed blank, only its arrow pulsing red. Aya's reflection appeared in both doors, two versions of herself, each angled slightly wrong. She sprinkled salt before stepping closer. Inside the cab showing 13, her reflection smiled a second too late. Fear thickened, but habit pushed her to act. She tossed Salt into the threshold. The display blinked, stuttered, then reset to 11. The reflection's grin faded, but its lips still moved silently, whispering. Aya staggered back, heart pounding. Upstairs, Kenji watched his room light dim. His glass rattled against the desk. His phone screen lit with a call from floor 13. No number, no contact, only those words. He froze, breath caught, then let the call die unanswered. But the faint echo of his ringtone came from the elevator shaft behind his wall. Downstairs, Mrs. Watanabe saw it all on the monitors. The cabs weren't moving by mechanics anymore. They were aligning. 2 lives upstairs, 1 desk downstairs, bound by the 13th stop. She clutched her charm tighter. Not tonight, she whispered, but the building had already chosen tonight. Kenji could not escape the call. At 12:33, the elevator down the hall chimed and opened on its own. His door lock clicked once as though tested from outside. He grabbed his briefcase like a weapon, whispering curses he didn't believe in. The lights dimmed. Through the thin wall he heard the sound again, breathing steady, as though someone pressed their face close to the shaft. His phone buzzed once more, screen blank. Then faintly the emergency exit sign in his hallway flickered, forming an outline of a figure standing still. He bolted, yanking open his door. The elevator at the end of the hall stood open, glowing. Against his instincts, he stepped closer. The panel inside displayed B. The hotel didn't have a basement. He leaned in cautiously, and there it was, his reflection waiting, but with eyes hollow, mouth moving silently. For a second, he heard words forming in his own voice. "Come down." He recoiled, running for the stairs. The stairwell door, which had been locked for Aya, swung open effortlessly for him. He stumbled inside, slamming it shut, but as he descended, he realized the staircase looped wrong, each landing repeating the same patterned carpet, the same framed print. He checked the door on each floor. Each opened onto the same hallway. He had entered a loop, drawn into the hotel's secret geometry. He was trapped. Aya wasn't trapped by loops, but by silence. Floor 11 muffled sound, as if wrapped in fabric. She scattered more salt, whispering her grandmother's prayers. Her cracked watch ticked furiously, then stopped. The elevator beside her dinged again. The doors opened. Inside, she saw not her reflection but Kenji's sweating, pale, pressing buttons desperately. She screamed his name, but no sound came. He didn't look up. Then the cab doors shut, and the display jumped wildly. 9713 blank, then nothing. Aya staggered back. She ran toward the stairwell but found it welded again. Behind her, the service door rattled louder, then creaked open an inch. From the gap seeped cold air, carrying the faint smell of incense mixed with mildew. She pressed her hand against the crack and felt a pulse, steady, beating like a heart. The wall itself breathed. A whisper slithered through the gap, in a voice close to hers. "Stay," she screamed silently again, salt falling from her trembling hands. The air grew heavy, pressing her shoulders down. Her knees buckled. She closed her eyes and imagined her grandmother folding towels, muttering sutras, reminding her that doors only take you if you agree. Aya threw the last of her salt into the service gap. The door slammed shut violently, echoing down the corridor. The elevator lights flickered. For a heartbeat she thought she had won. But the cab nearest her opened again. This time, no reflections at all, only darkness inside, waiting. Downstairs, Mrs. Watanabe faced the decision she had postponed for years. She could not sit safely behind the desk anymore. The monitors flashed static, cameras blinking out. She grabbed her charm pouch, tucked it into her pocket, and stepped toward the elevators. Both stood open, humming softly. One displayed floor 13, the other flickered between B and blank. She whispered sutras as she approached, her hands steady despite her fear. She had once lost her husband to a similar building, an office tower where an elevator carried him to a floor he never returned from. She had worked nights ever since, trying to spot patterns before they claimed others. Tonight she realized, the hotel wanted more. She pressed both call buttons. Both cars stilled. For a moment she swore she felt someone standing behind her, breath cold against her neck. She refused to turn. Instead she sprinkled rice and salt at the threshold. One cab groaned, lights dimming. The other pulsed brighter. She knew then, only one could be sealed. The other would carry its passenger. Upstairs, Aya clutched her pocket, empty now of salt. Kenji pounded on a stairwell door, trapped in repeating landings. Mrs. Watanabe whispered, "Take me instead." She stepped inside the glowing cab. The doors closed with a sound like lungs filling. The panel displayed 13. The hotel exhaled, satisfied. Kenji finally burst through a stairwell door onto the lobby. Though he had been descending endlessly, the sudden return disoriented him. He staggered forward, seeing Aya running down from another corridor, pale but alive. They met at the desk, both gasping, only to find it empty. Mrs. Watanabe's notebook lay open, pen across the page. The last entry read, 12:44, passenger chosen. Aya picked up the charm pouch lying beside it, still warm. Kenji grabbed a desk phone and dialed security, but the line hissed only static. Then the elevator chimed. Both looked toward it. One cab stood open, empty. The other displayed 13, before the light blinked out. Silence pressed heavy. They knew. Mrs. Watanabe had gone where they couldn't follow. Aya whispered broken prayers, clutching the pouch tight. Kenji muttered curses under his breath. Together they stepped back, refusing the invitation. The elevator doors closed, slow and final. The lobby lights flickered, then steadied. For the rest of that night, neither car moved again. The hotel breathed once more, returning to its ordinary rhythm. Guests woke, checked out, ate breakfast, unaware of the contract paid, but Aya and Kenji knew, and when they left that morning, they both used the stairs. Neither spoke of Mrs. Watanabe again, but both carried her memory as warning. Rules exist for reasons. In Japan, people say elevators are moving rooms between worlds. Break the rule, and you may ride to a floor that isn't meant for the living. Every haunting carries its roots in culture, and this story is no different. Elevators in Japan are not just mechanical boxes, they are thresholds. In Shinto and Buddhist belief, boundaries matter. Doorways, bridges, tunnels, mirrors, they are in-between spaces, neither here nor there. Spirits, it is said, favor these passages because they blur lines between the living world and the unseen. Midnight amplifies this. In Japanese folklore, midnight is the hour of overlap, when protective energy weakens and wandering spirits drift freely. Combine that with an elevator, essentially a sealed box that carries you through unseen floors, and the stage is set for a haunting. Many hotels whisper of phantom floors, levels that appear briefly, then vanish. They are often described as too dark, damp, or slightly wrong, echoing our story tonight. And rules like never riding alone after midnight aren't jokes, they're survival patterns. Aya's grandmother knew that. Mrs. Watanabe lived by it. Kenji ignored it and nearly paid. Folklore reminds us, technology doesn't erase old fears, it gives them new rooms to inhabit. One belief tied directly to this story is the idea of lost spirits hitching rides. In Japan, spirits who died suddenly or violently are thought to wander in search of hosts or companions. Elevators, being moving rooms, are convenient vessels. There's a common superstition among older Japanese travelers. If you step into an empty elevator at midnight and feel sudden heaviness, step back out. That heaviness isn't mechanical, it's a passenger you can't see. Some even carry salt or protective charms, much like Aya did, to cleanse thresholds after stepping through them. Mirrors inside cabs are another layer. Mirrors are seen as spiritual portals. They don't just reflect, they reveal. That's why many avoid looking too closely in dimly lit elevators. You may see yourself, yes, but slower, paler, different. And if your reflection doesn't move with you, that's the passenger showing its interest. These stories aren't confined to rural shrines or countryside legends. They circulate in cities, hotels, hospitals, places where elevators are unavoidable. The superstition grows because enough people report odd details, skipped floors, lingering pauses, doors that breathe like lungs. These experiences feed the folklore, and folklore shapes the rules. The legend of the 13th floor is also worth noting. Many Japanese buildings skip numbering it, not just for Western superstition about the number, but because of a local belief that 13 marks imbalance, a step out of rhythm with the world. Hotels sometimes replace it with 12A or skip straight to 14, but people still whisper, even if the number isn't on the panel, the floor can appear at midnight. Stories circulate of passengers stepping out into long, dim hallways, smelling of mildew and incense, only to return and find the doors closed too quickly. Mrs. Watanabe's story connects directly here. Her husband lost to an extra floor, never found again. The cultural memory of skipped numbers is powerful, because absence itself becomes suspicious. When Kenji saw 13 appear, it wasn't just fear, it was folklore made real. The rule of never riding alone ensures that even if you reach that stop, you're not chosen. A passenger alone is an easy claim. Two riders together create resistance, witnesses against silence. And so the rule has lingered for decades, whispered between staff members and repeated in warnings. Another belief woven into this haunting is tied to protective rituals. Salt, rice, sutras, they're not random objects. Salt purifies, rice anchors spirits to the earth, sutras realign breath and memory. Aya's habit of carrying salt, Mrs. Watanabe's charms, even Kenji's obsessive orderliness. All of these are cultural shields. Order itself is a ritual in Japan, lining shoes, folding towels, keeping symmetry. These acts are more than politeness, they're defenses against chaos. Spirits feed on disorder, imbalance, broken rules. That's why Kenji's disrupted routine, taking a cigarette, returning after midnight, opened him up to the pattern. Rituals remind the living where they belong. Break them and doors open where they shouldn't. In fact, older hoteliers in Japan sometimes perform blessing ceremonies in elevators, sprinkling salt in corners, chanting sutras, or hanging small paper charms above the doors. Guests never notice, but staff know. Elevators don't just carry people, they carry stories, echoes, energies. Without rituals, the machinery hums differently. Ask anyone who's heard it, a groan like breath, a pause like thought. Folklore explains it as spirits rehearsing their entry. Rituals, even small ones, keep them waiting. But when the ritual fails, when someone forgets the salt, or rides alone, stories like tonight's unfold. So what do we learn from Aya Kenji and Mrs. Watanabe? That rules matter, and folklore isn't harmless. In Japan, elevators at midnight are treated with respect, because they collapse boundaries between levels of existence, and in that moment you are both traveler and offering. Mrs. Watanabe chose to protect others by stepping in. Aya survived because she clung to ritual. Kenji nearly vanished because he treated rules as jokes. Their choices mirror how Japanese culture treats hauntings, with caution, ritual, and humility. Not fear alone, but respect. Hotels, hospitals, even office towers become testing grounds where modern steel meets ancient belief. The truth is simple. You don't need to believe for it to matter. The elevator doesn't ask. The doors open, the floor appears, and if you ride alone at midnight, you might not return. These stories live because people keep retelling them, warning others. The question is, when the elevator doors open for you at the wrong floor, what will you do? Step out, or stay inside and hope the doors close again? Either way, the passenger is already watching, and if you're watching this right now near midnight, maybe listen for that soft hum in the background. Maybe it's just your building. Maybe not. Midnight rides end, but not all passengers step off. Tonight's story leaves us with more than superstition. It leaves us with silence. Aya still avoids elevators. Kenji stopped traveling for work, and Mrs. Watanabe, her name is spoken softly among staff, but her shift never officially ended. Maybe that's the price. Someone always has to ride so the rest can walk away. As you turn off this video, listen closely to the air around you. Do you hear the hum of your own walls? A faint vibration you can't explain? Maybe it's just plumbing. Maybe it's the elevator moving on its own, waiting for you. If your screen flickers, if your reflection lags for even a heartbeat, don't lean closer. Some passengers don't like being noticed. Goodbye for now. Thank you for walking through this story with us, step by careful step. But remember, the hotel doesn't close its doors just because our story ends. The ride continues, somewhere else for someone else. And maybe the next empty elevator at midnight will stop for you. If you've made it this far, ask yourself, would you ride alone knowing what you know now? Or would you wait for another passenger, even if it takes all night? Stay with us because Paranormal Asia has more doors to open, more stories already waiting in the dark. Watch our next video before the elevator dings again.